now, as I'm older, when I go to events, and I was at an event last week, and then I was like, yeah, it says get there by 5:30. I'll get there about 7. And I've done this before and I've missed the event. I've got there too late.
The power in these pages is understanding that not everyone has the same perception as you.
If you're from like a direct culture and I'm sitting there saying, you know what, Marion, this is just kind of, not, you might think I'm insulting your intelligence. I think, just tell me what you think.
Yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot and it's a valuable book in terms of applying it now.
Yeah, this book was really important. I think it actually opened like a door in my mind.
Welcome to The Power of Pages, where we review books that ignite your mind,
elevate your life,
and drive your ambition. And this month we have a very special episode because we are joined by 2 lovely guests. We have Consensual and Marion. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining us on this episode. And this month we are reviewing The Culture Map by a lady called Erin Meyer, or Meyer, how do you think you pronounce it?
No, I think Meyer.
So let's just get straight into it, yeah? Who is this book for?
For myself, this book, well, Erin Meyer, she's an expert in cultural management, so that's across the world. So I say for people that are either living abroad or working abroad or trying to manage people in other countries that are foreign countries to where they're from. What do you think?
I agree. I think it is for business people, people that are dealing with international clients. But I think the great thing about this book is how it can be applied for everyone. So obviously I don't have international clients, but I can see how important this book would be in communicating with people from different backgrounds. And I'm kind of realising that what you know is just what you know. It's only British, and the second you step out of that, there's other. So yeah, I think it's a book that can be applied for everyone, which I really like.
Yeah, and yourself, Amar?
Yeah, well, I'd say like, obviously I think it's for the new worker, like the new, I suppose, globalised worker, person who's dealing with multiple countries, I suppose, or different people every day. And I think even though we're obviously young and we're not really working with anyone across the globe, I think because we live in London or we live in a place where there's so many different cultures interacting every day, I think it's important to like acknowledge what the different, I don't know, cultural differences are and how someone's brain might think a bit differently. So I think, yes, it's the new age worker, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally think it kind of is a communication book because it's about how we communicate with people from different backgrounds and different cultures. I think if you're communicating with people from, different cultures, different people have different perceptions, and this book helps you to understand why different cultures might act or perceive certain things in a different way. Yeah. And I guess we're going to go into specific examples from the book. And I guess I want to start off with a story in the book called Silent Bow. And I found this very interesting because I was able to relate it to us actually delivering these book reviews. Yeah. And the story goes, the lady Erin, she was delivering a presentation to a bunch of Chinese business partners, and she had a Chinese colleague there with her. And she asked her colleague to prepare so that he could present too. They were both supposed to present together. And she was presenting, and she was waiting for him to like join in with her. And he was just sat there silent, nodding away. And she was thinking like, why is this guy not coming in? Is he not prepared? And it turned out later on that he was, when she then said, I forget his name, Bo, like, do you have anything to add? He then said, yes, I do. And then he started reeling off and going in detail. And basically what the point is, in Chinese culture, he was waiting for her to have a pause, waiting for her to like give him the space to talk. He didn't want to interrupt her. And I think that's culturally quite different because, for example, on this book review, I think it's a good thing, by the way, but we interrupt each other all the time. Yeah. And in Chinese culture, according to this book, they don't do that. Yeah. They were waiting, he was waiting for her to give him the opening. So I don't know what your perception of that is within your life. I don't know if you notice that among your friends. Do you interrupt each other? Is that? Yeah,
I think it's more of a natural thing to do. But it was really funny when that story about the silent boat, in terms of just her expecting like, why isn't he, like, what's going on? And realising it's just culture. And I think the good thing about, so you said the book is a book about communication, but I feel like it's a history book as well. Especially when she breaks down how people from certain cultures, the way they communicate in that way is because of things that happened before and that predated how their communication styles. And also a reminder of how we communicate as British people, something I've never thought about. It's just like, I guess, our standard of living, the politeness, but then kind of how direct we are with certain things and how indirect we are with certain things. So yeah, I guess in my life, not necessarily, because more or less everyone comes from similar backgrounds, and everyone, even if everyone is of different ethnicities, majority of people are still nationally British, if that makes sense. So if it's friends of a different background, everyone more or less our age or our generation, they would have been born here. So we have the same patterns of speaking to each other. So I think interruption is one of those things. But I guess it depends on the space that we're in. So like, I'm less likely to interrupt a Marian in this space rather than like if we're talking with friends. Because I guess like our brain kind of sees this as a different setting.
I think though, like, I thought that story was funny because I'm just like, it's just a funny story to tell, but also at the same time I think it's a weird like cultural moment versus like a character moment. Because if I was in that meeting room and I was speaking continuously and I thought someone wasn't speaking, perhaps because they weren't unprepared, I'd assume that they were prepared. If you've come to this meeting, I'm going to assume that you're prepared. So I'd probably ask you like, is there anything you want to add mid-sentence, just so that I don't feel like I'm taking up all this space. So I think what I found interesting about this book is differentiating what is character and what is culture, and also how each individual is also a bit different. So then I think Erin Meyer like talks about it a lot, about how you need to be making sure that you're doing things that can blanket all communities as well as all individuals within that community. So I think that story was funny, but it's telling about other things as well in the book.
Also a reminder that she's operating with her American mind.
Yeah, exactly.
So while she's like breaking down and giving us these scales to like compare countries with, she's still American. She's still operating with like her more American attitude, where everything's kind of big and kind of in your face and kind of just expecting and loud and talkative. So yeah, how we perceive things, like if it was a British person waiting for this Chinese person to interject, I don't know, I just feel like the response would have been different and the expectations would have been different. Our standards of politeness isn't the American standards of politeness.
Or what we perceive to be polite. Because the different cultures' perceptions are different.
I think like it comes down to how you've been socialised. Because like you said, she's been brought up in a thing where it's quite, you can come out and speak out and whatnot. And her experience in other meetings and interviews and whatnot have been such where people kind of over talk each other at times and then one person will be quiet. But just to, like you said, it's how she's kind of been socialised. But it's interesting because one thing that's polite in one culture is rude in another culture. So yeah, that was quite interesting, that story. There was like, even right at the beginning of the book where she was talking about, she was in India and then she was looking for directions. So, and that was quite funny actually, and I asked one of my,
Explain.
So she was staying at a hotel, fill in the gaps if I miss anything out, but she was staying at a hotel and she was looking for a particular restaurant to go and eat at another hotel. So she went down to the concierge and she asked her, how do I get to this restaurant? And they said, just go right and it will be right in front of you. So she came out of the hotel, turned right, she's walking, she can't find the hotel, she can't find it. Then she's gone back and asked again, basically went back about 3 or 4 times. And then, but it's implied, so what it boiled down to was, in India, in those sort of cultures, it's implied, where within our kind of Western cultures, you need to be quite specific with things. So it's like, turn right, you're going to see a traffic light, walk 3 steps forward, then turn left at the next shop when you see it, and then walk up the steps and down X, Y, Z. So
let's give the specific terms of the differences, because what that is called low context cultures and high context cultures. And I've got the definition of each here. I don't know if you've written the definitions down.
I did, but you can do it.
So I'll go low context, you go high context. So a low context culture is good communication is precise, simple and clear. Messages are expressed and understood at face value. Repetition is appreciated if it helps clarify the communication. So my understanding of low context culture is you don't need any additional information because the person has given you everything you know. So high context culture?
Yeah, high context communication. Good communication is sophisticated, nuanced and layered. Messages are often spoken and read between the lines. Messages are often implied but not plainly expressed or plainly expressed. That was actually when I was dealing with one of my team members, and it made me, I was speaking to them something, and normally if I'm giving an instruction, I am as clear and as literal as possible. I don't want to leave any gaps for any sort of, and no nuance. I don't want nuance. So when I'm talking to my team member, I'm laughing at myself because I'm thinking, I'm so low context. This is such a low context conversation. Because again, what I'll do is I'll say, I need you to do this, and then I'll explain it, and then I'm gonna repeat myself about 3 or 4 times. And then I do that, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I do it intentionally. So it's like, I was like, okay, this is, obviously I wouldn't have been able to label it if I hadn't have read this book. I was like, okay, that's just kind of how I think everybody communicates. And for me, I think it's a good way to communicate. However, again, talking about how you're socialized and where you bring up on cultures and X, Y, Z, in other countries or other cultures where they kind of communicate in different ways, that might, it's not going to work. It won't be as effective. So that's another good thing about this book. I think one, it helps you understand other people, because some cultures, again, it's a very multicultural society we live in. They communicate in different ways, so they might just imply something, but then you might be thinking, oh no, they haven't understood what I said, but they actually understand specifically what you said. So it gives you that better understanding.
Yeah, and I think to explain the difference as well, low context and high context, the English language, according to this book, has 500,000 words, whereas French language only has 70,000. So that's a massive difference. So the French have to read a bit more between the lines because they don't necessarily have the vocabulary in their language to express what they mean, whereas in English there are lots of different nuances, like you said. This episode, I have the benefit of seeing your notes, which I caught a glimpse of something. And I want you to scroll back up and explain this line for me.
Listen to the air.
Yeah.
That's the name of the title, that's the chapter.
But I guess there was a story about how, is it Japanese, listening to the air?
Yeah, Japanese people.
So if you've got it, you go for it.
I don't have it right in front of me, but I feel like I can remember. Basically, in Japanese culture, they don't always express explicitly what they mean, or they don't use words to portray the exact meaning of what they're trying to say. You've got to read the air, you've got to read between the lines, and you don't want to say things too plainly to people. They've got to just be able to understand what you mean and then work with that context. So I think that's what high context is about, or those cultures where you need to be able to understand the context of everything that's being said and not just the individual words or sentences. Like I think in English, we can see bits and pieces of a sentence and understand what's being said. But in these cultures, you need to understand the entire paragraph. Or you're not really going to be able to read between the lines and that type of thing.
This made me think about, won't go into it too much, but Outliers.
Okay.
It's one of the books we reviewed. And was it South Korean Airlines?
Yes.
So South Korean Airlines, I'll be very quick, there was a lot of crashes. Basically, there was a lot of time where the planes were crashing a lot. And now, as a result of that, they're not, all the pilots, they have to speak in English. Because of the respect, there was like a level of respect that they were given in their normal language, and then 2, because of that because when they're communicating with the stations abroad or where they land, I don't know what they're called, but when they're trying to land in the airport and whatnot. So, but now they only speak English because they wanted to kind of take out that sort of listening to the air sort of thing, because people were misreading things.
Accurate. I see, and that's why they were they were having problems.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, good book, good review. We won't go into that much too much, but yeah, good book, good review. But that just made me think of that actually.
Yeah.
I think that sort of communication style can only survive in a place where people are accustomed to it, and if you're not accustomed to it, then you're more or less going to suffer, because even how you read between the lines is going to be different as to someone who's native to that country. Whereas we can have a conversation, and even like my co-worker, she's Italian, and sometimes I say things to her and she's like completely confused. Completely, even though her English is really good, she's been completely, and I'm realising because of how I'm speaking is kind of just inferred as a British person, whether it's colloquial, whether it's the way we put words together. She doesn't understand, and have to find ways to communicate.
Go on, Erin.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think it's weird operating in a low context world where there's high context people around you. I think obviously my family are Jamaican, and I think compared to English people or British people, Jamaica's a much more high context place where you've just got to understand what people mean, even though they're not exactly saying what they mean. So I think like speaking to my dad, when I'm telling him an instruction, I'll tell him exactly what he needs to do 10 times over, because I want to make sure he knows exactly what he's doing. But then he's going to find it rude. But with me, I don't mean this to be rude. I just want to be as clear as possible. And I think, yeah, that's just an interesting nuance between even English culture, because obviously Jamaica speaks English, even though it's patois, but it's English. Even between those different nuances, I mean, different countries, there's still nuances in the language.
I think we'll definitely touch on it, or I want to try and touch on it, but I perhaps want to talk about how our heritage has influenced us in terms of these different sections. So in terms of high context, low context. So for example, like you said, the Jamaican there, you might have some traits where when you're communicating with someone, you might be more high context because of the Jamaican heritage, or we'll definitely come onto this, is the linear time versus flexible time. Because we know definitely, I'm part Jamaican, Caribbean time, right?
Island time is real, man.
Yeah. Versus, in fact, we'll jump around. Let's go on to that now, yeah? Linear time versus flexible time. Time is perceived in different cultures in different ways. And it was quite interesting because in the book she's talking about, in France, being 10 minutes late is acceptable. Like if you're 10 minutes late, that's fine. In British culture, definitely in England, if you've got a business meeting and you're 10 minutes late, you'd be expected to say, oh, I'm running late, or you're texting, especially if you're dealing with me, right? If you haven't seen Relentless, our last book review, check that out. You'll understand the joke more. But yeah, in different cultures, depends, timing is different. So linear time is project steps are approached in a sequential fashion, completing one task before beginning the next, one thing at a time, no interruptions. The focus is on the deadline and sticking to the schedule. Emphasis is on promptness and good organization over flexibility. And then we've got flexible time, with project steps are approached in a fluid manner, changing tasks as opportunities arise. Many things are dealt with at once and interruptions are accepted. The focus is on adaptability and flexibility is valued over organization. And it was great to see this for me because I'm, as you know, very linear with my time. But seeing the benefits of flexible time just helped me feel like I should be less rigid in certain situations.
Yeah, but you've got to work in the culture you're in as well.
It's
true.
True.
What I mean? Because the other person, so like say with you guys, like if you're trying to apply a linear time to say a job or something like that, but your boss, so not linear, sorry, flexible time to a job, but your manager isn't working on flexible time, it's not gonna work well for you. Do you see what I mean? But then again, if you go to another culture, so say you go like the countries here, they got for flexible time, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, India, Nigeria, and Kenya. If you go there, then it is again on the same flip. If you flip it and you're trying to work with linear time, you're gonna get very frustrated because people are working on flexible time. So I think it's not something that I'm going to apply to like my business practices, not in this country. But then if, it's quite interesting enough, again, this book gave me a lot of like self-reflection because I was thinking, I would think that I try my best to be in the time. It's an effort, but I do try. And I succeed 99% of the time. But then like, when I go to, I remember growing up, I'm Nigerian, my parents are Nigerian. So like, when I'm going to like a party, like Nigerian parties, you don't get there at the time when the party starts. If it says 4 o'clock, if you turn up at 4, it's not even, the whole man is going to be open. So it's like, when I now, as I'm older, when I go to events, and I was at an event last week, and then I was like, it says 6. It says get there by 5:30. I'll get there about 7. And I've done this before, and I've missed the event, or I've got there too late. So it's like, so even like last week, I was like, I'll get there. Then I was chilling, I was making food, I was speaking to my wife, I was just chilling. Then I remembered an email I got saying everyone needs to be seated by 5:55. So then I made it just on time, but I was like, why am I like this? Because if it was just any sort of social, basically what I'm saying is, if it's a social sort of working social environment, like a party or drinks or stuff like that, I'll get there an hour, 2 hours later.
Flexible, isn't
Flexible,
it?
yeah, flexible, because but it's because I never realised that. So yeah, that was quite interesting. But
I'm exactly the same, man. I feel like if it's a serious thing, I'm gonna be there early. From time it's a social event. Well, you know this already. If it's a social event, I'll try to get there on time. If someone tells me get there on time, I'm gonna try. But if I'm thinking, oh, it's a party, why am I getting there on time when it starts? No one's even gonna be there. So I'm gonna get there an hour later, and then something will go wrong.
I actually like working with linear time. I feel like what's the point of setting a time? It's like everyone's not gonna come on. And it's interesting because me and my mum, like, so I work with linear time. She works with flexible time because she doesn't have a perception of time. If somewhere is 5 minutes away, she will leave 5 minutes to the time she needs to get there. Like, it's just 5 minutes. I said, but you need 2 minutes to put your shoes on.
Yeah.
You need to find your coat. You need to find your keys. You need to walk there. You need to factor in the point that maybe while you're walking there, you bump into someone. You actually need to give yourself 15 minutes to get there. To her, it's just like, why would I do this? Just 5 minutes away. So it's very interesting to see it like written down and to put labels onto it. Because to me, like, even to get to work, it probably takes me about no more than 9 minutes, but I give myself 20 minutes. I give myself to get myself to lose something, to go get it, to come back, to put my shoes onto it, and then stroll.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very interesting.
I think that's British culture, though. I think British culture is linear time, but then when we have family events or social events that are cultural, we know that it's flexible. Definitely, if I have a family event on my Jamaican side, I'm gonna not get there at the time that they tell me.
No
Most probably, they're still sorting out the food or whatever.
You're gonna end up helping setting up.
Yeah, exactly. You're part of the organisers now. But on the English side, if they say 1 o'clock, it's 1 o'clock. Like everything's ready at 1 o'clock. And there's an interesting story about this. I think it was a Spanish. He was going to someone's Spanish house, or there was someone going to a Spanish house for dinner, and they got there exactly on time. And their parent told them, don't get there on time because they need time to set up. So if they tell you, 4 o'clock, just give them 4:30 because they want a little bit of time. So this person applied that to all of their social environments. So when they did that to the American was like, oh, are you okay? Like, was there traffic on the way? Was there like an accident? Like, how come you're 30 minutes late? But again, just different cultures.
Yeah. Something quickly, just the last thing I'll talk about on this, but it was like talking about standards and customer service and customer service, which she speaks about. So she did a talk in Brazil, a presentation. She did the same presentation in Brazil, I think in America, and somewhere else. I can't remember the third place. But in America, she was on a stage in front of loads of people, and they've got like given her time, like, all right, 10 minutes, 20 minutes left, 15 minutes left, basically 5-minute countdowns. So she was doing a 45-minute talk, and she finished it like dead on 0, like when there's no time left. Perfect, thank you very much, great. She went and delivered the same talk in Brazil, and I think the guy was called Renato, and then he said to her, she goes, how long do I have to speak? Again, coming with that linear time approach. He's like, well, you've got an hour, but if you need to take an hour and a half, just take it. And she was like, no, but how long do I have? And I think that's how I'd be like that. I'd be like, how long do I have? Trying to just tell me, because I don't want to talk over and talk under. But so from her, she's maybe thinking, you're quite unprofessional because you're not giving me a time frame. And he might be thinking as well, like, just relax. You've got, this is how much time you've got between how much time you need. So anyway, the talk goes on, and she went a little bit over. So I think he told her an hour, let's say. She's gone over, and then there was a question, but where she was trying to stick so much to her linear time, someone asked a question, and she was like, you know what, I've run out of time, but sorry, I can't answer that question now, or something like that. And then afterwards, the guy was like, he was impressed with the talk, but he was like, oh, you could have given more time to answer that question, because then he feels like, from his perspective, we've paid you to come and do this talk, and people still have questions, and you haven't answered all those questions. So that's kind of like, for her, definitely, and even feels that's quite a mind shift, because you kind of think being professional is doing my time frame. But for him, he's like, well, you're here, we want to get the best experience. And if it takes an extra 45 minutes, that's how long it takes. Or if it takes an extra 20 minutes, you see what I mean? So again, it's like, so your approach, because someone might say, oh, that's so unprofessional, they didn't even give her time to finish. But at the same time, it's like, well, that some things are unpredictable. You have to be flexible, hence the word flexible time. So yeah, it was, that was interesting for me, because it kind of, again, changed my kind of, my thought process on certain things. Like, sometimes you need to be a little bit fluid
Yeah, just to touch on that quickly, I had a workshop the other day, and prior to the workshop, it was all in the same building. Prior to the workshop, I was delivering a speaking engagement, talking to someone about my business, etc. And that was running behind, and I was like to the organizer, look, like, we've got the workshop, but bear in mind, they've organised the whole thing, so they're aware of all the situations. But they've told me the speaking engagement is at 10:30, the workshop's at 11. So it's like 2 minutes to 11, and I still haven't done my section of the speaking engagement. And I'm like to the organizer, look, like, you know, she's like, relax and don't worry. So anyway, do my talk, 11:15, finish. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to get my stuff and go to the workshop. I go to the workshop and everyone's just chilling. Like, I was there like a bit panicking because I'm late now in my head. But that person who organised it was operating in that moment on flexible time. So it was just quite interesting. Is there anything specific that you want to touch on quickly?
I do, but I was actually going to ask you guys. I was going to ask you if there's any chapters or anything that you kind of specifically liked, or
while they look for it, you start on something.
I think the one about trust and the one about the many faces of polite.
Okay.
Yeah.
And okay, there's a few.
Can we do many faces of polite?
There's actually. So okay, my 3 favourite ones would be the many faces of polite, how much respect do you want, and the head or the heart. Because I think, not that they're the most important, but I feel like they are very relevant. If I had to personally like prioritise, I would prioritise those because they look at feedback, communication, linking that, trust, and trust is important for any sort of business, not just business, but for life. And then the idea of like a hierarchical structure versus the egalitarian structure. So with the many faces of polite, I thought it was just interesting how we choose to communicate. So for me, low context, that's concise, that's clear, that's direct. I think it's more beneficial for everyone in every situation to operate. If you're giving negative feedback, give it in the direct way. But then there was it France? Not France. I think it's like America, where they'll give negative feedback but warp it behind positive upgraders. And how you can get confused by that. And I think
you're not from that culture.
If you're not from that culture. And I think how confusing and damaging that could be for people, because just personally, I think things are just better if it's just straightforward, instead of coddling and putting it in these things so that the person feels better, or so that you feel better as a person, instead of telling someone, oh, you did it, and so forth and so forth.
Do you think, just a question on your heritage, do you think your heritage has maybe influenced that?
I think so, probably. My mum's Jamaican. My mum's Jamaican, so it's very, there's no beating around, there's no reason to beat around the bush.
She calls it, so there's like direct cultures and indirect cultures. I can't remember the list of where, she does a lot of scales in the book. You got the scale? Yeah, go for it.
Right here. Well, obviously, on the left-hand side, where direct negative feedback are countries like Russia, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, France, Norway, Italy, and in the middle we've got the US, Canada, UK, Argentina. Going more to the right side now with indirect negative feedback is Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, India, China, Kenya, Ghana, Korea, Saudi Arabia, Japan, Thailand, and Indonesia.
And I think what else I really like is the idea of cultural relativity. Like, everything is in relation to the other. So like, what one person might be like, oh yeah, America's very indirect, and then someone else will be like, well, they're not as bad as so and so. Everything is in relation to one another and in comparison to each other. So yeah, I think that was very interesting, especially when you see the many stories of like people's difficulties, thinking like, yeah, I'm doing so well, when the person's like, they're not doing well at all. That kind of, it's perception. It's perception at the end of the day, and it's also what you're used to. So yeah, that was definitely one of my favourite chapters.
There was a great story about a Dutch colleagues communicating in terms of feedback, direct feedback. And there was a Dutch colleague who had an issue with one of his American colleagues who was having, one of his American colleagues who was having an issue with another meeting that they were having, where that colleague was dropping their kids to the school and they could hear the kids in the background. And that Dutch colleague was speaking to his leadership team, was like, how do I deal with this? I said it to her and, she got really upset with it. Like, how do I deal with it? And his other Dutch colleague in that meeting, there were different cultures, his other Dutch colleague said something to him like, well, Martin, you are inflexible and socially ill at ease. And he continued to like give him harsh feedback. And like the other colleagues were like, oh wow, this is a bit harsh. And then later on, Erin, the author, was there. Yeah, later on, Erin saw those two colleagues laughing and joking together, and she was confused. Like, how can they be so friendly after he just ripped into him and like?
I would have been confused as well. I'd have been offended. But I don't talk to me again.
And the guy Willem, who took the feedback, he said, "Of course, I didn't like the feedback, but I appreciated it." He's like, "Feedback like that is a gift. Thanks, Martin, for that." Martin was the guy who gave him the feedback. Yeah, thanks, Martin. So he thanked him for that harsh feedback because it was a reality check. But obviously in British culture, we would probably say, look, maybe you could have approached that situation a bit differently.
Possibly, potentially kind of trying to give agency to the person. Trying not to tell them what to do.
I agree. I feel like when I give feedback to someone, I tend to be on the more central side. I'm going to give you the honest feedback that you need, but also at the same time, I feel like I want to sugarcoat it a little bit because I don't want to break your heart. Exactly. I don't want to break that person's heart and make them quit entirely what they're doing. But also at the same time, I don't know if it's in this chapter or another chapter, talking about telling people things behind closed doors and not in front of the group. Yeah. I think that situation seemed worse to me when I read it because it's in front of the whole group. I think if it was just an individual conversation, like I'd come and tell you something personally if it's just us two. I wouldn't say it in front of all our friends because I don't want you to feel a type of way and feel like I'm coming for you in front of everybody. But I suppose that's even a cultural thing that we do. Some people will just say anything in front of anyone because in their culture it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think the situation plays a point as well. Like as someone that has a team of people, I definitely select the harsh feedback for like one-to-ones as opposed to like in front of, because it's embarrassing and whatnot. So that's cultural. But then again, I think from like a sporting context, if I'm playing football with my football team, I might not have time to say, oh, sorry, can we just go and have a chat around the corner? You see what I mean? So, but yeah, no, that was really interesting about the upgraders and the downgraders. I was trying to find in your book but we've got different books. So about the Dutch translations, because there was like a Dutch translation guide. But on my book, it was page 67. We've got slightly different ones, so I couldn't find it. But it was like, if a Dutch person says this, what they're really saying is this, and X, Y, Z. Okay, yeah. You know what I mean? So,
I've got it. I've got that.
That was quite interesting.
Where is it?
But it's fine. While you're looking for that, what that also made me think about, because again, I used to work in schools, and she speaks about the French school system, I think, versus the American school system. And the American school system seems to be very similar to the UK, because obviously growing up, when I was in school, we have red lines all over our books, mistakes that I've made, our ex-teachers telling you 2 out of 10 or however you did. Now, that is kind of, in UK system now, when I was working in schools, and quite a while ago, but it seems the same, where teachers write in bright colours, they give you upgraders, like, oh, this is great, can you just work on this? So one thing on the schools I used to work in used to do was 2 stars and a wish. So what that basically means is you've done these 2 things great, work on this. That's kind of the strategy. So layer that criticism basically. Where she was saying with the French schools, it's just straight, direct. This isn't good enough. X, wrong, X, Y, Z. But it's interesting because is there a right way, is there a wrong way? Maybe it is nuanced anyway, of course it's nuanced, but it's just like, that was quite interesting because how does that play out now in talking about giving that feedback? Words such as like, this is kind of or sort of a little bit off, when really you just want to say you've done it wrong. Which one's better to do? Which way is better to articulate that? Again, open to debate. But that was I'm glad you picked that chapter out because that was a really good. Because someone might feel again on another. If you're from like a direct culture, and I'm sitting there saying, Marion, this is just kind of not. You might think I'm insulting your intelligence. I think just tell me what you think. Yeah. I don't care about. Stop trying to make me feel good. Just making me feel good with actually telling me this isn't good enough. Or this is because how do I know when you're telling me it's good? How do I even know that it really is good? Because you're sugarcoating everything. So
I've got the
that's probably
translations here. Do you want to have a look at them?
I just want to pick 1 or 2. Like I found this funny. I was actually laughing. Let's see. So what the British might say. I was a bit disappointed that ... What the British mean. I am very upset and angry that. And then what the Dutch understand. It doesn't really matter. Do you see what I mean? So it's like you got a British person and a Dutch person having that conversation. and the point of the conversation is totally lost.
Gone completely left.
But then from that position, you need to realise, as the manager or as the leader or whoever it might be, or the person trying to convey that message, I need to get this message off as in the best way possible. So this is why this book's good, because if you are trying to work abroad or live abroad, or even you're dealing with people, you said you work with a colleague that's Italian, it gives you a bit more understanding about, okay, in Italian culture, or if I was working with someone from a Dutch person, it gives me a bit more understanding about them. So
yeah, I want to add one more.
Okay.
With all due respect, is something that we say. What the British actually mean is, I think you are wrong. And what the Dutch understand is, he is listening to me. Like, so I found that interesting. Go on, Chris.
Yeah, I think what is most beneficial for the other person, just like speaking to someone one-on-one rather speaking to someone in a group, I think is more beneficial depending on what you need to say to them. And I think coming from a direct culture, I rather have things direct. Just like sometimes you say if people try to coddle something, it's like they're trying to insult your intelligence sometimes. So I think it's honesty, personality, character. Is it a business setting? Is it a family setting? Is it someone above you, someone that you're working with? I think all those things kind of play a role into it. But I feel like, number one, it's always better to be direct, but how do you choose to be direct? It's like those people like, yeah, I'm such an honest person, but then they say things, they deliver things horribly. But they disguise it with like, I'm just an honest person, but there's ways to be honest, just like there's ways to be direct. And I think
again,
it's that middle line of,
Again, culturally, in the UK, you know, that's our perception of how things should be delivered. But in Japan, wouldn't go down well.
Yes. Another thing she said quickly as well is like, don't try and mimic other cultures. So she gave an example. She tells lots of stories in the book, and I forget it, but somebody came in and he was teaching students and he was trying to be like from their culture, but he clearly wasn't. But he missed it because, again, as well as just saying the words, it's how you say the words. Things that we're not even, you know, body language is, you know, how you standing, what's your facial expression, the tone of voice, all this kind of stuff. So that was, again, it's like, so she gives, what I do like about the book is she gives small little tips of how to kind of ingratiate yourself within that culture, about how not to don't try and mimic it, just understand it and then understand your best way to work with it.
There's so much we could talk about in this book. In fact, this is probably the book that I've written the most notes on out of all of our books. But we're not going to have time to go through it all. Amarian, do you want to just maybe pick one more thing that we can go through quickly? One thing that you potentially found interesting, other than the rest of the things?
I think who decides, the chapter 5, big D or little d, who decides and how. I think that chapter was quite interesting. Let me get my notes up.
Yeah, okay, so like decision making basically, consensual decision making or top-down decision making, which was quite good. So let's just give some context. So consensual decision making is decisions are made in groups through unanimous decision. Top-down is decisions are made by individuals, usually the boss, and different cultures have different decision-making processes. So yeah, I don't know if you had any...
Yeah, I think like with the work that I've done, I think having a manager, me personally, I like a manager that provides structure. If I enter a role and you tell me, yeah, you can do whatever you want to do, I want to make sure that I'm still performing in the way that you expect. So I think, obviously we're British, I think our culture relies on management styles that mean you tell us what to do, you don't have to be overbearing, but just give us that structure and we work within that. And I think that's quite important to me as an individual. I don't know how other people like to work. I don't know if you like to work the same, but I know me, I like to have that little bit of structure.
Yeah. We've been doing some work experience, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I like the idea of firstly, I like how a lot of things in the book calls Erin to look at herself, because she, in the beginning, she talks like, yeah, this sounds like a great idea, and so like top down, all of us talking about it, and then she realizes that she becomes that American person that he was complaining about, who finds himself too busy, too lazy, who can't be bothered to participate in the group decision making, and I feel like there's a time and a place. Me personally, I do like when someone just says something and we're able to follow it. But there's sometimes you need the group to move forward, but not everyone has the same. It's like if we're discussing the layout of maybe a room, not everyone's going to have the same thing to contribute, because someone might not know about interior design, someone might not know about lighting, and the people that do know best, I think sometimes it's okay for the people that do know best to lead. Not everyone needs to have a say every single time. So that was interesting, kind of looking at my own work and how I work with friends, or if I'm doing a creative project, and I think there's just times where the group needs to make the decision, and sometimes one person. Quick example, we organised a live music event, and the team, normally we work everything as a team, the three of us. Can you approve this? Can you approve that? But with this, because it was music and it's something that I love and I know about the most, they gave me free rein to do everything that I wanted to do, and they said, just tell us what to do, and we do everything. And I feel like in that situation, it worked perfectly, because I had the most knowledge about music and venues and scouting artists and so forth. And some situations we need the group, and sometimes I might not say anything. So I think it varies.
Okay.
Go. I was going to say also, I think like something important that they said in this chapter was the individual making decisions like within a specified time frame. Obviously, when you work with consensual decision making, it takes a lot longer. Everyone has to come to the same consensus. Well, in this chapter, it talks about, obviously, we live in a world where everything is a competition. Like, business is a competition. If you're not working fast enough, another company is going to work faster than you. So the Japanese faced a couple issues with that, because they're a consensual culture, whereas in America, they just this is a top-down decision. So American companies can work faster than Japanese companies. And it made me reflect on myself and thinking, even when I work in a group, I like to do everything individually, because I know I have this time frame, and if I'm here needing to ask everybody the same thing, like if I have to ask everybody a question, it's just going to drag out the whole process. I'd rather do what I can do individually and then check in with you, and then if you want me to change that, I'm willing to change that. So I think, that just made me reflect on that really.
Right, we don't have time to go into the many gems that this book has to offer. Very quickly, the power of these pages. Chris?
For me, just understanding and learning, really. Understanding yourself and your own culture, and learning about others and how to work with those cultures.
Yeah, okay. Consensual?
Similarly to Chris, I guess kind of reflecting on ourselves and realising these things about these patterns that we have being born and raised in Britain. And most importantly, the willingness to learn about other cultures. And I feel like, if I was sent into a room next week, I could kind of gauge how to build a relationship internationally with someone based on prioritising how they choose to build with it, how they choose to trust, or how they choose to communicate. And I really appreciate that. I feel like I've learned a lot, and it's a valuable book in terms of applying it now. So with my colleague and so forth, and even if I'm communicating with customers at work. And so I like it.
Cool. Meyer, the power.
I think this book is really important. I think it actually opened like a door in my mind, because even though I acknowledge that people come from different cultures, I try and take people at face value as an individual and try and treat everybody the same. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't treat everybody the same, but I'm saying like that you need to acknowledge and then try and craft your behavior, I suppose, especially in business, to how people want to like interact with you. You need to be able to perceive how their best way of interacting and how you should approach them. So I think this book is really important.
And I think for me, the power in these pages is understanding that not everyone has the same perception as you. That's for me the power. Like, we have a perception, not everyone has that same perception. So that's the power. Now we do our star rating and difficulty rating. So how difficult was this book to read? I guess, Consensual, I'll let you go first. 0 to 5.
3, maybe 3.5. It wasn't necessarily difficult, but like keeping up with the terms. So like low context, high context, the top down. Like there's a few things where like I'd make a note, then I'd be reading, then like, oh wait, I need to go back and remember. Then like I'd go back and I'd flip, and then I had to give everything my own definitions really to kind of remember. So it wasn't difficult, but the terms, and it's a lot of jargon. It's a lot of jargon. She reuses the jargon. So if you're not paying attention from the beginning, you're going to be confused. And
3.5.
Star rating. Star.
Yeah, we'll go do that after. Meyer?
I'd say 2.5. I think I actually agree. I didn't think about that. The jargon that she uses. I think that does make it a bit difficult. I had to go back and check a couple of times as well. But also, I think because so much of it is storytelling, I think that makes it just more digestible. I'm able to understand what she's saying way more because she's telling so many stories, and it just makes it a bit more fun. Otherwise, it'd just be loads of non-fiction writing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm going to give this a 3. Yeah, it wasn't the easiest read. It wasn't super difficult. The stories made it easier to read, but yeah, lots of jargon that made it a bit more difficult. And yourself, Chris?
Yeah, I'll say a 3 also, for similar reasons to yourself, but I enjoyed it. I didn't find it too difficult to read, but yeah, I'll say about a 3.
Yeah, okay, cool. And star rating, how good was this book? 0 to 5?
I think a 4.
Okay.
I'm gonna say a 4 as well, actually. Yeah.
Wow, I'm gonna go. It's a 4 as well. It's three 4s.
I was giving it a 3, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But yeah, a 3. I enjoyed the beginning really much. I really enjoyed the beginning and the middle. The end kind of, besides the last chapter, but it's a 3 for me. It's a strong 3, but a 3 for me. But
3 for you. Okay, cool. Well, read the book, check it out. Let us know in the comments what you think of the book. Next book, if you want to join us on our 1 book a month journey, we have
Man's Search for Meaning.
Thanks for tuning in. This is The Power of Pages.
And we review books.